Happiness is beautiful, it's a kind reality. Happiness is the highest good, happiness is free. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.
Welcome to the Happiness Show. This is George Ortega. I'm here to talk about happiness because happiness is, always has been, and always will be the point of it all. Today our topic today is happiness and transcendentalism, and we have a special guest with us. Bob Dean, who's from Chappaqua, New York, is going to be with us explaining how happiness can be gained through this philosophical tradition called Transcendentalism. Bob does his own cable TV show. It's called The Bridge, and it airs, I think, right here on the station every Wednesday at 10:30, but he also puts episodes and much more information on his website at www.gbridgetv.com. All right, so welcome to the show, Bob.
Oh, glad to be here, George.
Great. So before we get into the Transcendentalism, do you want to say more about your work with your show and all? Or?
Yeah, sure, that would be great. With my show, basically, I do a lot with video, music, poetry, and I like to explore a lot of imagery. It's heavily, I guess you could say, like surrealistic in a way, kind of exploring images that might be unconscious and trying to bring them to the forefront.
Oh.
That's one aspect of it. We also do like a lot of spoken word poetry and a lot of music.
Excellent. Okay. All right, now with now we've got to just make this clear that there's the expression transcendental meditation, and that this might have been what that term came from, but they really are very, very different, right? I mean,
they're completely different. The transcendentalism that we're going to be talking about was an intellectual movement that started around the 1840s, 1850s. People like Melville, Thoreau, Whitman, and stuff, and it was a philosophical outlook, whereas TM was a movement that was put together in the 70s, actually late 60s.
Right.
And although they do have some similarities, they're not the same thing.
Right, okay. And again, we're going to be exploring today just how some of these concepts that Emerson and others created that go under the name of Transcendentalism can really enhance happiness, not just for us as individuals, but maybe even more importantly for us as a society.
Oh, definitely.
All right, so let's start out with the first. We're going to, I guess, explore seven points related to transcendentalism. The first one is that they kind of like promote the idea of establishing identity.
Right. So basically, they were exploring the self, and they found like what they were responding to is they found that people were getting too caught up in society. For instance, Emerson was talking about like how people will be going to church but not really like exploring God, for instance. Like they'd be just more to be seen at the church, more getting caught up in a social identity, following the herd as it was. So when they talk about establishing identity, they mean getting closer to yourself, more to the real essence of yourself.
Right. And so what do you think it is about our society that kind of like works against that makes that not so easy?
Well, again, like with so much like Madison Avenue just taking over our consciousness, bombarding us of what we have to be, like if turning women into objects, for instance, like how they define beauty. Let's say like you have an airbrush model, nothing against that, but it's almost an ideal that can't be really reached by most women and stuff. But yet that's what you find people striving for. So like what they would say, substance identity, you have people like developing like eating disorders, trying to live up to an ideal that they can't even reach. Or that's just one example. You could have stuff where like you're more masculine if you drink this beer, or if you drive this car. It's always, instead of like being with yourself, you have to get this product to be something.
Yeah.
So you're never being yourself. You're always striving to be what they're manipulating you to go towards.
Oh yeah, and one of, I think, the big problems with this is that a lot of what they manipulate us to strive for is just doesn't create happiness. I mean, for example, like in addition to the things you mentioned, they constantly promote the idea of measuring our self-worth by how much money we make, by how much
By the materials you have and stuff.
Yeah.
And then you find like I found a lot of rich people I know, like they're not happy. They've got everything. They're on they some of the most unhappiest people I've ever met, because they have a lot of time to think, and those goods and that status didn't get them what they wanted, and two, they develop like a distrust of people. Like, well, people are like me not for me because like maybe I had this house in the Hamptons, or maybe I have like this bank account or something, and so they get very distrustful.
Oh yeah, I say this fact a lot on this show, that 37% of the people on Forbes' list of wealthiest Americans are actually less happy than the average American. The average American is only about 70% happy, so that clearly demonstrates this point.
So the Transcendentalists, we're talking about, how to get close to that self, and a lot for them was like going out in nature. That's why you get Melville writing his sea books, culminating in Moby Dick and stuff, or you have Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, Song of Myself, which is just going out, and he was kind of like the prototype of the modern day beatnik. Just going out and experiencing the self, not being confined and stuff.
Right. So how?
Or Thoreau going up, famously going up into the cabin up in Concord, and just taking the bare essentials. So when they're talking about establishing identity, they're also saying just taking the essentials, what you need, not being caught up in all this stuff. How many times have you met people, they get the stuff and then, it loses its attraction and it just sits there in the house, just gathering dust. They had fun with it for a little while and then it's over, Yeah.
And, this is really important in our culture, in Western culture, because, the research shows that there are 4 main personality traits that we have that contribute the most to our happiness, and self-esteem is one of them. And if we're kind of like, if our self-image is really distorted by Madison Avenue and by these things that we really aren't, then that's going to be impinging upon our self-esteem. So that's very important. Transcendentalism also talks about what's referred to as rugged individualism.
Right, which is basically really, being yourself. Again, not going for like the labels and tags and society might put onto you. You find like so much in the culture it's a hierarchy.
Right.
And like they were trying to break down hierarchy. Again, like, so it's more of in terms of relating happiness in your theme, it's more of a sense of a whole. You don't have this pyramid structure, of power flowing down. Like we all belong to a circle. Like the Indians would express it. Oh, that's a little different, but similar concept of the medicine wheel. And see, so you're not getting this isolation. So it's a contradiction. You're going all the way into yourself, and yet you're getting more connected.
Yeah, well, that's also really important, because like in terms of like, comparing ourselves with others, this competition, this hierarchy, one of the things we tend to do is, and that it determines how happy we are, is we will compare ourselves. And a lot of times we'll compare ourselves to people and institutions that we'll consider in some way above us. Let's say those who we consider have more education, more success, more money and all. So I imagine this trend says, no, that's not who you are. You're somebody, that you can get to know really well, and to the extent you do that, you have much less of a likelihood to compare, and that's going to make a person
right.
happy.
So that's Emerson wrote a famous essay about not going to church, and what he wasn't trying to get people not to believe in God or spirituality, but what he found in this time, it was like the late 1830s, and he was a Harvard divinity student, and he came from a long line of blue bloods and stuff. So it was a shocking move, but like he wrote this famous essay counseling people like, don't go to the church on Sunday because you're getting too caught up in status. Because what he was seeing was like people were more concerned about what dress they were wearing and where they were in the pews. Like obviously the people up closer had more of a social standing than the ones in back, and he found like people weren't listening to the message of the scriptures. They were more concerned with like being seen and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's important. You were mentioning to me before the idea that Transcendentalism also advocates not just reconnecting with ourselves, finding out who we are, but also reconnecting with our environment.
Right. So like you would say, you get like I said, like in all those men's writings, you get them going out into the environment, being aware of it. It kind of dovetailed with two of the movement, which is called picturesque aesthetic. It's a whole way of perceiving the environment and stuff. Basically, like observing like the difference between light and shadow, chiaroscuro. Like Central Park was developed along these lines. One thing that was interesting too is like they were coming away from classicism. So classicism would emphasize rationality, smoothness. They would prefer, let's say, going out into the environment and looking at a decaying log. They found that more character because the log has all the character, or people's wrinkles, or gray hair. They're more interested in character and stuff. So like going out to the environment and seeing it.
Right. So it's not like sometimes this is something also Madison Avenue I think tends to promote, this idea of just surface beauty. That there's
exactly. They had a concept of the sublime, and they would like things that they found more sublime were more beautiful and stuff. So like in other words, like they would find like an older woman more beautiful for them because in her face and her psychology is so much more of a history, of a tale to tell.
Yeah, I notice this is beginning to come into our media. I've seen posters recently of older women, like sometimes with almost no clothes on.
Well, they just had that famous ad campaign about a month ago with the women. They weren't exactly fat, but they had. Did you see that? It was
I did.
Underwear commercial.
Yeah.
And
it shows people how we really are.
Although, like some people were rightfully so, still criticizing because they still had to go out and buy that stuff. See, it's still like an object that they need.
Right.
But at least it was getting more to a realistic like a view of how people are.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Definitely.
And that's why it was. And that's one reason why they did it, because they knew it wasn't they cared about being more realistic. They just knew they would get hype that way, and then indeed they did. And the women that were in the models were on Oprah, and a bunch of other shows. So it got the hype they wanted. But at least it was starting to move in that right direction.
Sure. Okay. Another aspect of Transcendentalism is that.
But I just wanted to say one thing with the environment too. The average American, that they don't see their environment. The average American, I was reading a study from Harvard, just sees the environment of the 10 feet that they go to get to their car, and then the environment is something that rushes by in their car on the way to work and stuff. So they don't have a sense. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal with that? But it detaches people from like choices that are going to affect them and stuff. You have this global warming and stuff. Where you get like a president saying it's not happening, even though like the snows of Kilimanjaro, they're no longer. They've all melted. And so by not having that awareness of the environment, well, that's something that's not affecting me, although it is affecting you and stuff. Or when you have like corporations dumping chemicals, let's say in Africa and stuff, people saying, well, that doesn't affect me. It's not in my immediate awareness, but like it will down the road. It's just like accumulating. And Transcendentalists would say like to get out there and be aware of it and stuff.
Yeah, and right, because I
like for instance, like because of that movement, you have Central Park today.
Right.
You would not have had that like for efforts of like such individuals. They just would have converted that into housing and stuff, and you wouldn't have that aesthetic. It's just stuff like that. It's like specific stuff like that. You think like, well, we need that for a moment, but look at the joy that park's brought to like millions of people over 100 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of the idea is that a lot of us live in cities. We see concrete, sidewalks, streets, paved streets. We don't see too many trees and grass and all. And if that's our reality day in, day out, we will lose consciousness of the importance, not just the aesthetic beauty of the environment, of nature and all, but the importance to our survival.
Right. So that's what I'm just saying. Like that's part of this movement is to kind of get aware of it. You could say, well, 1850s, but it's like a movement that keeps coming back in different forms. Like you could see it like in the beatniks in the 1950s, which just kind of like modern day examples of this. Like people like Kerouac and Ginsberg and Burroughs were just articulating a lot of the same themes. So it's not like they've really gone away. They just come out in different expressions.
Okay. Okay, now, I think a lot of us, a lot of people work 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. And a lot of people, between all they have to do, raising family, working, etc., they don't have time for happiness. People are just busy doing. What does Transcendentalism say about, like, reclaiming our sense of time?
Well, again, like by putting yourself in touch with yourself, it's not, having to be so caught up in this rat race. Like, you might not need to have to work so much if you're not so beholden to getting those prized possessions or that prized house and stuff. You wouldn't maybe have to work as much, 12, 14 hours keeping up with that. If you can go out and get pleasure from looking at a beautiful sunset, that doesn't cost you anything. If you can learn to have that kind of appreciation, or if you can take like a walk through such a park and like, if you were to study like how it was developed and like the aesthetics behind that park, there's a lifetime of enjoyment in that, and that doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool because time. Most people don't realize how important time is because, like, if a person is engaged in any kind of activity that demands a lot of concentration, whether it's work or, just a lot of things we have to do, a lot of time that will distract us from feeling that happiness. Just like our brain can only has a certain amount of bandwidth to just take in this stimulation. And
right, when you see people getting that look, you can see them on the train, they're really, I call it going over the other side. They get that really haggard look, and they're bitter and they're miserable, and I think it's great to enjoy work and going to work. It's not putting that down at all, but I'm saying when it just becomes that, something's like lacking.
Yeah, they're trading their time for things that don't create happiness. We talked about something that I think it was interesting. It was created back, 100, 150 years ago with the Transcendentalism movement, but now I think is even much more important. It's the idea of free flow of information.
Right, so that's going to go into what we're talking about later too, about the questioning of authority. It's like getting your facts, knowing your information, not being a song and dance and stuff. Like it started with them, like say with Emerson, he's critiquing the preachers at the time because he wants to get to a real sense of spirituality for him. I'm saying, like at the time he felt like these preachers were like saying one thing but they were living another. Like for instance, like that's the time of the Mexican-American War, and like they were, these guys couldn't understand. Well, how can you be talking about peace when you're sending taxes to go to this war? And it's funny how some things never change. They were protesting a war then that they felt was unjust. There's an unjust war going on now.
Yeah, and also like with free flow of information. To me, that means like we've got like media. Media molds our minds. And we were talking about Madison Avenue. We're talking, the news media.
Right. We were also talking about like how there's only 6 media companies control all the thing, and so when you see these news reporters, and it's very subtle. But like their political biases go into that speech or what they raise or don't raise, and stuff, and they have a whole agenda, and it's been a whole complacency because like they don't want to get fired, they want to get promoted, so they're like sheep, going around. So they're not doing anything what the fourth estate's supposed to do, which is question authority, bring out the hard facts. They're more interested in their careers and. But when you only have 6 media companies controlling the information, basically you basically have like 25 people controlling the whole news outtake, and they're right down there in the city, within like a 8-block radius. It's that small.
Right, and
it's really that small. Like and they say one of the ingredients of a democracy is information, is an informed citizenry. But you're not getting that now. Like George Carlin was saying, like, they'll give you 200 choices of coffee at Starbucks, 600 flavors of cream cheese, but they'll give you all those kind of choices, but the real choices you're not getting. So, like, you have 6 media companies, you have 5 oil corporations, have all gotten together now and are colluding to bring that price up and stuff. And when people ask them to donate 20% of their income back, it's been the best month ever for Exxon, or quarter, they're like, fat chance, no way,
Yeah. Okay. Happiness is an emotion. It's a feeling, and can be defined as being spiritual. And Transcendentalism pretty much promotes the spiritual as being higher, as being more to the point than this materialism we live in. What can you say about that?
Well, again, so it's hard to put into specific words what spirituality is, because every man knows that, a man and woman knows that inner for themselves. But they were saying, like, you have Thoreau going out in Walden's Pond, and if you actually read the book and just didn't bother with the cliff notes somewhere back in high school, like, you can see him going deeper and deeper into himself. It's like an awareness, and going further and further. Or you have like Walt Whitman, like All Through the Leaves of Grass, this whole great discovery of like this immense America, and like what he was like a nurse in the Civil War, and he got to travel around and see all this stuff. So it's a spirituality, but it's also like an aesthetic truth going into yourself.
Cool. Bob, we've got a little over 2 minutes left, and there's a point I wanted to get to. For example, Freud was supposed to be the leading authority on psychology, on our minds. The guy thought that happiness was impossible. His view of reality was so mistaken. Now, we have this idea now that many people are aware of questioning authority, but apparently this idea was promoted by transcendentalists, right?
Question authority for sure. Like they were saying, like I was saying, like how the Mexican War back then, I'm saying like into the moment now, like you had everyone accepting Bush's words on the weapons of mass destruction. Where are they? Now you have it's $200-300 billion money. Like you had like Walter Cronkite on the Larry King show the other day saying like we don't pay our teachers enough, and to really educate people to participate in democracy. Well, why don't we pay teachers too much? Because we're putting it into the war machine.
Yeah, and also it's the idea that, like, for example, what are we teaching our kids in school? We're teaching them how to go out and do things to make money to fuel our economy. We're not really teaching them what's in their best interest. Our government, is not focused on our happiness. So
right, they're not going for peace. They're going for war. I mean, like, there was never any connection with Iraq and 9/11, and yet because of like you have the media and stuff, 70% of Americans think that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11. That's dark.
Yeah. That goes.
And that's not leading to happiness. And I don't think anyone's happy with this war. It hasn't accomplished anything. We're almost near 2,000 deaths. When's it going to stop? He doesn't have an escape plan. And part of the Transcendentalism was they were anti-war. They were for peace.
All right, so Transcendentalism was created about 150 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And now we understand that what it says really is very, very relevant to our world today and to
very
happiness.
much in the moment.
Okay.
And that's part of what it was about, always like present tense and reinventing yourself in the now.
Okay. All right, well, thanks, Bob. This has been excellent.
Yes, really, love to come back on sometime.
Sounds good. Okay, that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching. In the future, we'll explore other topics designed to help us better enjoy life. This is George Ortega saying, be good, think well, feel very happy, and I hope you'll join us again next time here on The Happiness Show.
Happiness is powerful. It's our underlying need. Happiness is why we live each day. Happiness is destiny. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.